Hey, good day, Calvary family. It's great to be with you in this day. Can't believe February is almost over. This is crazy. Hey, but as a church community, we've been reading through the New Testament together. We just got done finishing the book of Acts. Way to go, everybody, on that. We are now in Romans. We just finished the second chapter today. Romans is definitely a different pace than Acts. And so for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be settling into discourse. And so Romans is a book of discourse. And then after Romans, we're going to be jumping back and grabbing a gospel of Matthew. And then we're going to go into more discourse books. But hey, what I wanted to do today is place the books of the New Testament in the book of Acts, like where they happened and where people were at the time, or a lot of them are where Paul was at the time. And then, and also what I wanted to do was talk about study Bibles and the ones that I prefer and which ones that I stay away from personally, but we'll cover that another time. So we're just going to look at the dates today and where these books fit in the book of Acts. So you might want a pen for this video, and you could kind of write in on the margins of your Bibles the dates and the book that was written at the appropriate place in the book of Acts. Okay, so Acts is a continuation of the book of Luke. So Luke doesn't really end. It just kind of continues on from the ascension of Jesus Christ right up through the book of Acts. And so the book of Acts ends with the house arrest of Paul in Rome awaiting trial. And so that's 60 AD. So from February 60, Paul would end up in Rome until March of 62 AD. So Acts is over March 62 AD. So Acts is over. And so at that point in time, the Gospel of Luke and Acts are complete and they hit circulation. So again, Luke would be compiled by Luke as well as Acts. Luke would be compiling the Gospel of Luke as he's traveling with Paul, meeting the apostles, different apostles at different times, and Marys and the other ladies that were the original disciples of Jesus as well. Okay, now let's go to the other New Testament books. Okay, so Book of Acts over at March in 62 AD after Paul went before Nero to stand trial. Okay, James is the first of the New Testament books in chronological order written. It was written around 40-42 AD. It would be before James is killed. It's James, the other James, is killed in 44 AD. Okay, that's Acts 12 when the apostle James was killed. Okay, James is the brother or half brother of Jesus, the epistle of James. Okay, so it would have to be prior to Acts 12. And so the first part of Acts 12, when Herod starts persecuting the church, probably was when the epistle of James is written. Okay, and then we move on from there. Paul's first missionary journey. Paul has 3 of them recorded in Acts. The 4th one was probably his last one. Others would say there was another one after that, but whatever. But the first missionary journey is Acts 13, and the first missionary journey happened from 46 to 47 AD. All of what I'm saying is AD because it's AD stands for Year of Our Lord. So before that was BC, or they like to do now before Common Era, okay, and then after Common Era, but whatever. Book of Galatians was written after the first missionary journey, and so written at 48 AD. So Galatians 48 AD. It was written after the Jerusalem Council of Acts 15, which is an extremely important chapter in the Bible. So Galatians is Acts 15, verse 30. So right there, look at that verse. That's when the book of Galatians is written, right in that time. Next comes 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Those 2 letters are written really close to each other. Paul wrote 1st Thessalonians 49 to 50 AD, and he wrote Second Thessalonians right after, because when he wrote First Thessalonians, after they received it, a counterfeit letter was sent to the Thessalonians that had Paul's name on it, and so he immediately writes Second Thessalonians. So both written in the same year. Acts 18:11 is when those were written. That was during Paul's stay in Corinth. Paul stayed in Corinth a year and a half. So right in that time, First and Second Thessalonians is written. Next comes First and Second Corinthians. First Corinthians, Paul writes 53 AD. And about 2 years later, he would be writing Second Corinthians. So First Corinthians, Acts 19, verse 10. So right there, he's got a 2-year stint in Ephesus that was followed by another year in Ephesus as well. Acts 19:22. During that year is when he probably wrote Second Corinthians. So Acts 19:10, 1 Corinthians, Acts 19:22, 2 Corinthians. Paul, from that 3-year stint altogether in Ephesus, goes over to Greece, Macedonia, actually stays in Corinth for 3 months. From Corinth, Paul writes the book of Romans. Okay, so that's Acts 20, verses 2 to 3. So right there, book of Romans is written. The year is 57 AD. From there, we have the Paul's arrest when he goes to Jerusalem. He gets arrested. He spends time in jail in Israel, in Caesarea, for 2 years. And then after that arrest, he appeals to Caesar, where he gets shipped off to Rome. And so Acts 24, verse 27 is his arrest in Israel, where he's imprisoned from 58 to 60 AD. And then he goes to Rome, and his Rome imprisonment is from February 60 to March 62. End of Acts right there. Acts 28, verse 30 records that. And so in his time in prison, which is over 4 years of this time, we have the prison epistles are written. They could have been written from jail in Caesarea, but probably written from Rome. And so Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemons are all written Acts 28, verse 30. So in the years of 60 to 62, that's when he would be writing those. After Acts, so a short time later, so Paul's released, and he goes on another missionary journey. During that time, he writes a letter to Timothy and Titus. So that's 63 AD. Okay, and then Peter at the same time writes his epistle, First Peter, all around the same time. Peter's in Rome, and Paul is traveling at this time. Peter and Paul both write final letters before their death, and they're both in Rome. They're both going to be executed in Rome. Paul's going to be beheaded because he's a Roman citizen. Peter is not, so he's crucified. Okay, so Paul writes to Timothy as his last letter. That's 2 Timothy. And then Peter writes 2 Peter. Both are written around the year 67. So 67 AD. That would be during Nero's reign. Nero would die the next year. Forced suicide. The guy's only 30 years old, a complete tyrant, maniac, demon-possessed person. And actually, he was forced for suicide, but his secretary actually did it for him. But now for a little bit of controversy. Some of the last books of the Bible that weren't mentioned. First is the book of Revelation. So I feel, along with other people, that the book of Revelation was written prior to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Lots of reasons for that. Some people would place it after the destruction, around the 90s. But because John mentions the temple in the book of Revelation, we would put it prior to 70 AD. So 70 AD is when the temple is destroyed under Vespasian's rule. Titus is the commander during that time. Later, Titus would become emperor too, and that was like 79 AD when he would become emperor. Okay, also, then we have the book of Jude and Hebrews. Jude, I don't know when Jude was written. Probably in the 50s, 60s, somewhere around there. Hebrews is, again, prior to 70 AD. He's writing specifically to Jews. The author's unknown. Jude is the half brother of Jesus who wrote the book of Jude. Hebrews, some people feel it was Paul, others hotly contest it. If it was Paul, and I'm not saying it was, but if it was, he probably wrote it from prison in Caesarea, which would be 58, 59 AD. All of them would have to be written before 70 AD. The only books of the New Testament written post-temple era would be first 1, 2, and 3 John. So First John being the main letter, and then Second and Third John being cover letters, just depending upon how far the initial circulation was. Okay, and those would be in the 90s, right in there before John's death. Now for the Gospels, Matthew was written while Paul and Peter were still alive. Early church father Irenaeus writes about that. And so the late 50s is where Matthew is placed. So 58, 62, like late 50s, so like 58, Paul's prison epistles would be like as latest of 62. So those were circulating. Matthew was circulating before the prison epistles started to get circulated. Matthew was written by Matthew, the tax collector. Mark was written prior to Peter's death because Peter dictated the Gospel of Mark to Mark, and that was by the church father Papias, and I think he died 130, so 60 to 130, somewhere in there, was Papias's life. So Mark was written mid 50s as well. Luke and Acts, we already talked about, that was 62 AD. John, the Gospel of John, very hard to pin down when it was written. Some people, again, want to pin it after the destruction of the temple. But I'm with the school that says before the destruction of the temple, because Jesus prophesies about the destruction of the temple in John, and John most likely would have said when Jesus prophesied it, and thus it was fulfilled when the temple was destroyed, right? So prior to 70 AD, and the Gospel of John would be the last of the Gospels to be written. And so there you go. There's the New Testament, where it falls in Acts and some of the other books, that don't fit in the book of Acts. So I hope it was helpful to you. If you liked it, thumbs it up, share it, and all that stuff. I'll see you guys all on Sunday. God bless you all. Oh, and don't forget, Jesus Revolution movie is out right now. So go to the theater, see it.